This video brings together all the different kinds of naming that we've explored. So naming covalent compounds, naming ionic compounds with fixed charge metals, naming ionic compounds with transition metals, and puts it all together so you can sort of see the whole picture all at once. If you haven't watched those other videos on how to name those types of compounds, you can start here if you want, or you can go back and watch those and then come back and watch this as well. So, like I said, there's different types of compounds, and these first three types, those with fixed charge metals, transition metals, or polyatomic ions, these are all types of ionic compounds. They all contain ions. The last, if I have two nonmetals, that's a covalent compound. And you should be able to name all four of these. So let's look at what questions you might be asking yourself. Let's start up here with this yellow, because the first question you're going to ask yourself is there a metal present in the compound? And the reason you want to ask yourself this is because two nonmetals means a covalent compound, and a metal means an ionic compound. So if there's not a metal present, so if no is the answer to that question, then you have a covalent compound. Fantastic. That means you use numerical prefixes in front of the element names. There's no mono on the first element. So you name the elements in the order that they're given, they're listed, and you add an I to the ending to the second element. So for instance, if we had, let's say, PF3, we would name this, first we'd check and see, oh yeah, two nonmetals, and so we would name this as phosphorus. Whoa, my pen's not working so well over there. Let's do it up here. We would name this as phosphorus, making sure to spell the element names correctly so that we get full credit on our assessment. And because there was only one of the first elements, I don't include a numerical prefix. But on the second element, I do have three of them, so I need to include a numerical prefix, and so it's trifluoride. Actually, you include a numerical prefix on the second element all the time. But we've got tri here because we had three fluorines. And then I'd be done naming my compound. If there was a metal present in the compound, if the answer to that question was yes, now you know you've got an ionic compound, which is great, but we need to ask ourselves another question, which is the metal a transition metal? So let's take, for instance, LiOH. If you look at LiOH and you check your periodic table, you'll see that lithium is not a transition metal. It's present in the first two columns of the periodic table, which are fixed charge metals. Since that's the case, we would simply name, so the answer to our question was no, there was no transition metal. Then we would simply name the metal first, lithium, and then we would name the anion. In this case, I have a polyatomic ion, so I just named the polyatomic ion. If I had, for instance, KCl, where my second element was not a polyatomic ion, then I name it with an "-ide" ending. So for instance, this one would be potassium and then chloride. And there's a full list of the names of the anions in the naming ionic compound formula videos. So if you didn't catch that, go back and check that out. If, on the other hand, the compound that we're naming has a transition metal, like say for instance I had nickel and this compound. Nickel is not in the first two columns of the periodic table, and it's not silver or aluminum, so we know it's a variable charge metal. It's also located in the transition metals, which is a pretty good hint. That means the nickel could have a variety of charges, and so when we name it, we need to name the metal first, so we'll name nickel, and then we need to figure out the charge on the nickel. Well, in this case, I have two nitrites, and nitrites, if you'll recall your polyatomic ions, you'll remember that that has a -1 charge. And this is one of the reasons you're asked to memorize a selection of those polyatomic ions, so that when you go to naming compounds, you're really ready and able to do that. It's kind of like becoming fluent in chemistry. So I have two nitrites, each of which is a -1 charge, which means my nickel has to have a charge of 2. So I put a Roman numeral of 2, which reflects the charge on the nickel, in parentheses, and then I say nitrite. Notice that in all of these ionic compounds over here, I did not use numerical prefixes like I did in my covalent compound. In fact, we only use numerical prefixes in covalent compounds. And like I demonstrated here, if you have a polyatomic ion, just name the ion in the order it occurs in the formula.